Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're joining us today because we're looking at one of the absolute most fascinating foundational stories in all of human history, the complete history of the Roman Empire. I mean, we're tracing a journey that is honestly kind of hard to wrap your head around. We'll see how a tiny, localized Latin tribe engineered a legal and military framework that literally conquered the known world. But look, we aren't just here to talk about ancient battles and old ruins today. We're going to pay special attention to how this civilization built a system of laws and politics that is still, incredibly, shaping the very reality you and I live in right now. It is a massive scope, so let's get right to it.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to trace Rome's chronological life cycle starting from river to republic, move through the rise of the empire, talk about the famous Pax Romana, its eventual fall, and wrap up with its enduring Roman legacy.
All right, part one, from river to republic. Before the sprawling global empire, Rome was just a localized kingdom, a tiny settlement plopped right on the banks of the Tiber River. To really grasp the immense historical scope we're dealing with here, we need to look at three major chronological anchor points. First is 509 BC, when the Republic was introduced. Fast forward centuries later to 27 BC, when Augustus becomes the first emperor. And finally, AD 476, when the Western Empire falls. Now for today, I really want you to lock in on that first date, 509 BC. This shift from a kingdom to a republic, that is a monumental legal milestone. It was the birth of representative governance, a total radical departure from absolute monarchy that laid the legal groundwork that would echo through the centuries.
Let's break down that fundamental shift. When Rome became a republic, they introduced a senate and a system of elected leaders, essentially pioneering the whole concept of checks and balances. This was a massive innovation in how a society could be legally structured. It wasn't just a king making up arbitrary rules anymore. It was a structured political system. Now, contrast that with what Rome eventually became, an empire where vast global territories were ruled by a single emperor. Understanding this tension, the early legal framework of elected leaders versus the eventual centralization of absolute authority is absolutely crucial to understanding Rome itself.
Moving right along to part two, the rise of the empire. So, how exactly does a republic of elected leaders devolve into an empire ruled by one guy? Well, it starts with unchecked, explosive growth. Over time, Roman armies just became insanely formidable. They weren't just expanding locally. This military machine was sweeping across the Mediterranean and North Africa. A major turning point was defeating heavyweights like Carthage. And defeating Carthage didn't just give Rome some extra land, it handed them complete maritime and economic dominance over the entire Mediterranean. This massive influx of wealth and resources is exactly what funded their seemingly unstoppable military machine.
But here's the catch. That vast military expansion eventually broke the Republic back home. The immense wealth flowing in from all these conquests basically started corrupting the Senate, which led to intense political conflict. And that dysfunction paved the way for a brilliant, highly populist military general you've definitely heard of, Julius Caesar. Caesar leveraged his immense popularity and military might to fundamentally break the traditional legal framework of the Republic. This massive power grab led to his assassination, which, spoiler alert, did not save the Republic at all. Instead, it plunged Rome into a brutal civil war. Out of all that chaos, his adopted heir, Augustus, seized power in 27 BC, officially becoming the very first Roman emperor. The Republic was dead, and the era of the emperor had begun.
Which brings us to part three, the Pax Romana. Surprisingly, Augustus's absolute power didn't just end the civil wars, it engineered one of history's most renowned golden ages.
So, Pax Romana literally translates to Roman peace. It was a long era of peace, prosperity, and just truly remarkable achievements. Because the internal fighting had finally stopped and the borders were relatively secure, the Romans could turn their attention inward. It wasn't just a lack of war, it was a period where Rome could finally standardize its administration and legal codes across millions of diverse subjects. Because let's be real, you simply cannot build a complex society if you're constantly fighting civil wars.
The achievements that blossomed during this time were just staggering. The Pax Romana brought incredible leaps forward in architecture, engineering, law, and culture. Now, while the architecture and engineering are legendary, their greatest achievement was arguably their law. This era allowed them to refine a highly complex, standardized legal society capable of managing a global population. Sure, they were engineering aqueducts, but they were simultaneously engineering the legal bedrock of Western civilization.
During this era, the Roman Empire reached its absolute peak, ruling over huge chunks of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East.
We are talking about an empire home to millions of people. To connect this massive population, they built legendary landmarks like the Colosseum and, of course, an incredibly extensive road network. And it's so important to understand that those roads weren't just for marching legions around or trading goods. They were the physical infrastructure that allowed Roman law, decrees, and judges to reach the furthest edges of the known world. It effectively shrunk the empire and enforced standardized rule everywhere.
But moving into part 4, the fall of Rome, because, well, no golden age lasts forever. We shift now from this incredible peak to the centuries of decline that ultimately broke this ancient superpower.
It's important to remember that Rome didn't just fall overnight. It was a slow, agonizing unraveling driven by a cascading failure of the very systems that made it so great. Political instability came back with a vengeance. Emperors were constantly being overthrown or assassinated. Severe economic problems completely drained the resources. Widespread corruption just rotted the government and the legal system from the inside out. And naturally, when corruption infects your legal and political systems, border security inevitably fails, opening the door for repeated invasions by barbarian tribes. Eventually, the pressure became so intense that it actually fractured the empire right in two, and those halves met very, very different fates. Overwhelmed by invasions and internal rot, the Western Roman Empire finally collapsed in AD 476, definitively ending an era. But the Eastern Empire, which we often call Byzantium, didn't fall. It actually endured and functioned for nearly another 1,000 years, deliberately preserving Roman law, administration, and culture, while the West descended into the Middle Ages.
Which perfectly sets up part 5, the enduring Roman legacy. The physical empire in the West might have shattered, but its ideas absolutely survived.
Even after its fall, the legacy of Rome lived on in incredibly systemic ways, heavily influencing our modern concepts of government, language, and military organization. The systems they built were so effective and so deeply ingrained that those ideas survived long after the actual Roman soldiers were gone. In fact, the legal frameworks of almost every modern European nation, and by extension a huge part of the world, are direct descendants of Roman civil law.
Our source material brilliantly sums it up like this. Its laws, architecture, language, and political ideas continue to shape the modern world. And that is exactly why the Roman Empire is considered one of the most influential civilizations in history. It isn't just about cool old ruins. It's about the fact that their political ideas, and specifically their legal codes, became the foundational blueprint for modern society.
Which leaves us with this final thought. When you look at a modern courtroom, or a modern senate, or just the very way a republic is structured with checks and balances today, knowing all this history, how much of our modern legal and political world is actually just an echo of ancient Rome? It is a pretty wild question to consider. The Roman Empire may have officially fallen in AD 476, but in a lot of ways, we are still living right inside the legal structures they built. Thank you so much for exploring this history with me on The Explainer today, and keep questioning the world around you.